Completely regarding FinTech that a lot of people like to predict the demise of funding in general at FinTech. It's been a bubble, whatever. But if you just look at the solutions out there, we don't have the right solutions out there. Like, it is hard for every one of us to do everyday budgeting at an accessible level, and that has not been solved. There's not a great example out there in the marketplace. That's a huge thing. All of the upscale companies serve like top-end markets with financial products. That's a huge problem. What you brought up, user experience, empathy, not being there in terms of the human interaction, huge problem. And we've got student loan debts. We've got 401k being the only source of retirement as pensions come down. Huge problems. So when there's huge problems, there's a market to solve those problems. So I'm not worried about whether or not there's a bubble in the short term. I'm looking at the long term, and this is a huge, huge area of opportunity. I think two areas that are hot right now. One, I mentioned it already, it's going downstream. So you see Goldman Sachs doing that with savings accounts, with things that people can invest in that an everyday person can have that gives them a higher interest rate than normal. I think that's a huge telling sign and fantastic, and you're going to see more and more institutions doing that. Generally, you see that the startups are doing it. Now you're going to see big institutions following suit, and that's going to impact the startup marketplace as well. The other place that I think is interesting, InsurTech, huge. InsurTech and FinTech both seeing regulations. Uber can do its own thing with regulations, that's one thing. But when it comes to financial services, you're not going to be able to get away with the same kind of thing, cutting corners in regulations. There's a lot of reasons for that. There's a lot of good reasons for that. But it also means there's a huge opportunity around regulation innovation. So there's some companies that are actually, and I see this more in Europe than in the States, that are beginning to make it easier for companies to comply with regulations. And that's super interesting because now you have a solution both for startups and for big institutions. So I think those are some of the areas that I'm looking forward to seeing in FinTech this next year.